Disclaimer. This podcast features a conversation between two individuals regarding assistive technology. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed during this episode belong solely to the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of their respective employers. Furthermore, this discussion is for informational purposes only.
Hi, welcome to Assistive Tech Today podcast. I'm your host, Vinny Lavoti, and today I have a special guest, a longtime friend, Dr. Tina Weisman, who is a doctor of occupational therapy. And Tina, welcome to Assistive Tech Today podcast.
Thank you, Vinny. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Tina and I have known each other for many, many years, working at Enabling Devices. Tina has actually worked on some of the design team with the founder, Dr. Stephen Kaner, helped develop some of the products that we have in the catalog today. But I'm going to actually let Tina tell a little bit about her background and what she's doing now. She's actually a teacher of occupational therapy. So Tina, I guess let me turn the mic over to you and just give our guests some information about your background and where you're at now.
Okay. I've had the pleasure of working with children with motor impairments for the majority of my career. I met Dr. Steve Kaner at Children's Rehab Center in White Plains, where I was the chief of occupational therapy for a long time. And we had a toy library team there where it was interprofessional, and we would meet and really come up with project ideas and design ideas that would facilitate play and adaptive play and enhance our children's ability to participate in the most meaningful occupation of play, and interact with each other, their siblings, and the world. And that shaped me. That experience really did shape me. And my specialization is in adaptive equipment, neurodevelopmental treatment, and I come from a strong biomechanical frame of reference, which I carried with me throughout my career, and primarily working with children with severe neuromotor impairments, primarily cerebral palsy, amongst other um, diagnoses as well. And I am currently have the pleasure to be a professor at the doctoral program of occupational therapy at Yeshiva University, where I teach neuroscience, anatomy, and currently assistive technology. So it's been a real pleasure to have the opportunity to pass my information on to the next generation. I did a lot of continuing ed workshops in my career, but I never really had the experience to meet them when they're starting, and really just pass it on and pass it forward to our next group of occupational therapists.
Right.
So it's really been an honor.
Yeah, no, that's amazing, Tina. You know, you have a wealth of knowledge, and definitely for somebody who's new, who's coming into the field, to have that knowledge, passed on to them. It's, decades of knowledge, condensed and given to them in their hands, basically.
Yes, it's remarkable, and enabling devices has definitely played an integral role. So, I always feel grateful to all that you guys do there as well. It really enhances our children's lives.
So, Tina, you wanted to dive in. We had talked a little before we started the podcast. You wanted to dive into, I guess, adaptive play and some of the other areas about with positioning and things like that, because these are so important. As I know Dr. Kenny used to say, I don't think it was his phrase, but he used to always say, kids learn through play.
Yes.
So, and that's so important. Just because somebody has special needs doesn't mean they need to play just like any other kid.
Yes. And, I've had the privilege of working with babies as well. And children that have movement impairments, um, especially if they have medical issues as well. We found, and especially working in the homes, a lot of things come to them. So parents or siblings or caregivers tend to bring the world to them, and they don't really have the opportunity to master their environment and gain agency in being able to have something influenced in their environment through their movement, through their intentional desire to play or create play. And play is our child's first occupation that's really meaningful. It's the earliest way a child begins to learn that they do have impact on their environment. They learn social skills, sensory motor skills, cognitive skills. It's really a dynamic systems theory that comes into play when our
Right.
children start to develop that. So I bring in adaptive switches, adaptive play, and I think you guys do it really well because you have toys that you hit the toy and that will create a response versus connecting a switch. Because sometimes cognitively that, they need the one-to-one correspondence
Is
of
there like a
direct
disconnect?
hitting.
Like they have a disconnect when there's a switch involved?
Possibly, certainly earlier on in development. Children love iPads because they hit the iPad, it's touchscreen, and something happens,
Right,
right?
right,
But you give that same child a mouse, they might not really have the understanding of how that mouse influences or gets them to their desired target on the page
right,
as they do the touchscreen.
right.
So it's sort of the same type of concept with adaptive play and adaptive play skills. So you really have that opportunity. But I also think of play as the foundational building blocks of development. So when I look at a child and we start to give them that ability to, I hit this and something happens. I can do this and something happens. Not only do we have the cause and effect and the cognitive development, but like I said, we have a concept of mastery. We also see the siblings or the other caregivers start to get more engaged,
Right.
right?
Exactly. Yeah,
Because
sure.
our parents, like, when I ask a parent, what does your child like to do? How do they entertain themselves? What is their desired activity? Very often, parents of children that have severe or even moderate motor impairments, they're involved in that. So there's no independent engagement or independent. And independence to me, we could talk about participation versus independence later in this podcast as well. But you give that child an opportunity to be able to engage in something, you see the world engaging even more with them. And I look at these switches and I look at access points and I think about if the child is going to need power mobility at some point in time. Will they need an AAC device at some point in time? Will they be using adaptive technology, which certainly is changing greatly right before our eyes, in the school systems? How will these points of access carry through them? And access becomes a term that's used or defined differently by a lot of clinicians. I find that, people will say access means they hit the target, they hit the switch, but there's so much more to it. You have to be able to hit your desired switch. You have to be able to release or stop or hit it within the timing, the desired timing, um, and then repeat it and do it again and not fatigue.
Right.
So there's a lot to switch access.
There's a lot of layers,
Yes.
basically. Yeah.
Yes. So we have to think about it as motor efficiency. And we have to think about it as, you know, can they do this? Can they play across settings? Typical children can. They could bring their toy in their stroller and they could bring it to a variety of environments and play with their desired toys. Many times our children rely on positioning, and without that optimal positioning, they're unable to access the device. So we have to think about that. We have to think about how we different points of access. It doesn't need to be just one. How can they gain that motor efficiency in all positions? How can they gain it throughout different environments? How do they generalize this skill so that motor efficiency starts to transfer into higher cognitive or mobility tasks?
Right.
And they're not focusing so much on the switch anymore. They're focusing on accessing their AAC device or being able to drive a power chair
Power
or
chair.
possibly a car.
Right, right. Even just like too, just like eating and stuff, are they going to be sitting, in a chair, like a specialized chair, as opposed to, kids sitting in a regular chair. They may need it.
Correct.
So these are all, like you said, these are all different layers of, how we get these things so that they can encompass it in their world.
Correct. Right. And so for eating, that becomes, a very big positioning is everything because eating is so complex, right? We have feeding, eating, and swallowing.
Right.
So all of those are layers of complexity that we have to think about in regards to positioning. And I've even had kids use switches for that because, sometimes the person who's feeding will overfeed or doesn't give the chance a child to be able to, I'm not ready for the next
Swallow the
mouthful yet,
food,
right?
exactly.
So you hit a switch when they're ready for more.
And now I see that, they have with some of the great technology we have, they have the feeders where they can use the switch to feed themselves. So they
The
have
Omni Feeder
independence.
is really
Yeah.
a phenomenal
So,
device that's out there right now, and that's come a long way.
yeah.
We've had feeders, they were actually, back in the day called cerebral palsy feeders. They
Right.
were that type of concept, but nowhere near the movement efficiency of that
That we
robotic.
have now. I know you don't want to say nobody wants to say, oh, I want to have a disability, but we're in a very good time where there's so much tech. And that's one of the reasons why I did this podcast is I wanted to make sure people have access to know what's actually out there and available for people. And just, on the topic of eating, it's something that we all just take for granted that it's just a everyday thing. For somebody with special needs, that could be a huge challenge or something that they can't do by themselves. So,
And there's a lot of emotional aspects to that as well. A mom or dad or, who's got, there's so much to having a child that has um impairments, motor impairments or medical issues, and then not to be able to feed your child safely.
right,
That's an emotional layer that especially new moms, they really struggle with that. And you have to come in and not to come into someone's home and say, well, this is how you feed. This, let me show you. You have to like really take the respect on of what it must be like for this family that's struggling with just the basic need of giving their child nutrients.
right, exactly,
So, positioning is always, the first place we start once we know for sure that they have a safe swallow, of course. But assuming that that is there, we work together. We work as a team, all the therapists, OT, PT, speech, we all work together to make sure that our shared goal of this child being able to participate as much as they can in whatever activities are essential and meaningful to them.
right. Yeah, it's a support team. I mean, it's not just one participant, it's the group and the parents obviously involved.
Yeah, the parents and the
Basically,
child are the leaders of the team,
right. Just
right?
to get through their daily, activities.
Yes. I mean, I remember a mom I brought in, I think it was one of your switches. It was the busy box switch. I think I have it here. It's this one. And I
Oh
helped
yeah.
the child, really like start to play with it. And this mom told me that it ended up being this child's favorite toy. And she was able to have a cup of coffee and have this child play with this toy, interact with the toy with pure delight, loved it. And the mom was able to like sit and just do a normal activity, like having a cup of coffee,
Right,
while her child is interacting with the toy,
right. Exactly.
you know?
Give mom a break and let the child be independent.
Right. And get pleasure out of seeing the pleasure the child's getting through play. So it really becomes when you really get that in, therapists come into their homes and there's so much, we give them to do. But when you bring in play for the meaning of play, not as an activity to distract from what you're doing, but really for the engagement and the
Right,
participation of play, a whole new world opens up, a whole new, you see it in the parents' eyes, you see it in the child's eyes. Um, And you're still being therapeutic. You're still working on
Right.
access. You're working on, we look at a hierarchy, we look at an anatomical site, we look at the selection process. There's so much to it, although to the naked eye, it looks like we're playing with adaptive toys.
Right. There's so many skill sets they're learning, like obviously fine motor skills. They're getting, if it's got vibration, they be able sensory, vibrotactile, visual, audio. There's so many things that we just take for granted, like, oh, this is just a normal thing. But to help somebody who needs these, to basically teach them these skill sets, it's like you said, learning through play is so important.
It's so important. And giving a child more than one access site, right? We don't interact with an object the same way every single time. Whatever that object is, whatever that tool is, whatever that toy is, right? We look at play or any interaction with objects external to us. There's so many different ways we interact with it.
Right.
Not just one grasp, not just in one position, not just one way. We have variability to how we interact with our environment and objects in it. That's what makes it more typical. Our children, especially children that have spasticity, their movements are more what we call stereotypical. There's less variation of degrees of freedom. They have less range of motion. They have less they could only necessarily do something one or two ways. So we have to be really creative because we don't want them to only be able to hit a switch when it's just positioned, with one hand in one position. We want to give them accessibility. We want to have them, if they're going to, if they're not going to be able to use a joystick and they're going to need to use um, switches for navigation, we need to have more than one site.
Right.
If we want them to be able to even use a joystick and propulsion, but then activate an AAC device or another device, we need more than one site.
Right.
So by experimenting and playfulness and letting a child start to, have variations of accomplishing the same task and playing with that, and playing with it within the ability of success. Like that's not the opportunity where we're looking to facilitate reach beyond arm's length. That's the opportunity of where we're saying, where's their greatest motor efficiency within this range? And how do we increase the opportunities of practice and play to gain that skill acquisition that we need for motor efficiency so that we're fluent in what we're doing. We're
Right.
fluent in access. There is a fluency that we don't tend to think about as much. And, I always tell my students, you can't just walk in and decide, oh, they can't hit the switch there. Like trial and evaluation is not training. We really have to give them all the opportunities across settings to develop that level of efficiency.
Yeah. It is so important to do all
Yeah.
that. It's funny, I was watching, somebody was showing me a software that they use for physical therapy, but it was structured, the therapy, instead of making them say, okay, you're going to do all these exercises, they used the game, and they were basically for like wrist, they were playing a game, but the game was basically teaching the therapeutics and basically doing it by play. So it wasn't
Yes,
so boring to them. They were engaged on it, and they were more apt to do the exercises because
of
it was
course.
more of a game and it was
Right.
more fun.
Of
So it
course.
was more
And that's
engaging.
human nature,
Right.
right?
So, and it gets them to engage more because they're just doing it. It's an enjoyable experience instead of being something that they don't really want to do.
Or necessarily see the progress of. It's easier to see the progress through a game and through play.
Right.
Your own progress, your own self-evaluation, right? It's
Hmm.
easier to see that than when you're just doing exercises. It's hard to find that meaningful outcome
Right.
and see the
Exactly.
real difference in it. So yeah, kudos to that PT. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, we talked about adaptive play a little bit and with positioning. I mean, one of the things that I always get a lot of questions from people is when they're trying to mount products or to give. I just had somebody today, they have a kid with a communicator and they don't have a tray on their wheelchair. Now they need to mount a communicator, for this child to use. And I said, the most important thing, I said, you can mount it, you can attach a mounting arm to the arm rail or somewhere else on the chair. I said, but it all depends on, how much distance you need, where do we need to position this for the child because they don't have a tray. So do they have their hands supported? Are they wearing a brace? There's so many, I'd rather have you touch a little bit more on that because that's so critical. And I do get a lot of calls about those situations. People don't really know how to implement mounting systems and things for devices, whether it's a toy or a communicator.
So that is a very it is a complex skill. And the first question is going to be, how are they positioned in that chair? Right? So you're starting not at the device. You're starting at the pelvis and you're making sure before you look at anything external that that child has the proper alignment so that they could have distal efficiency. Then you're going to look at what's the demands of the activity, right? So we have to look at not just the human, the user, but we have to look at the activity, the demands of the activity,
Hmm.
the assistive technology. So what kind of communicator is it? Is
Right.
it an eye gaze? Is it a scanner? Is it direct scan? Is it dwell? Is it switch? We have to look at that. Then we have to look at, what type of wheelchair is it? Is it manual? Are they driving themselves? Is it power? If it's power, how do we make sure that, you know, the navigation system is going to
Right.
be optimally positioned?
Exactly. It's not
So
interfering with
now
anything
where are we
else.
putting the AAC device? Um, and understanding the complexity of the AAC device. So if it's a really complex AAC device where that person is actually fluent, like a Toby, and you've got real fluency in your language, then we really need to make sure that their power chair and that AAC device is so well positioned that they can, maybe they have to stop to talk, but that is so fluent and so easy. We don't want our users to have to choose between mobility and communication.
Right. It has to blend. It has to be a meld.
Right. So it's not an easy answer.
Right.
And it really does depend on on the activity, the complexity of the AAC device and the chair.
Right.
You know, I generally recommend if you're going to put a device on, not to use an armrest because if we use an armrest and that armrest is coming off for a transfer,
Then you have to reposition
then you have to
everything.
move it back on.
Right.
And not all caregivers are going to know that exact spot. Whereas if you use the frame, you can actually designate that spot of where you're going to um, place the mount, place the
Right.
bracket, so that you could start to facilitate, um, the same site for motor efficiency, consistency of the
Yeah,
site
yeah,
for motor
consistency.
efficiency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a
Um,
complex puzzle.
it's
That's what I
not as
call it.
easy as mount, place, and hit.
No, no.
If it was, you wouldn't have AT specialists, right? You
Exactly.
wouldn't have people that are doing like it is very complex. And you do have to look at the user, the activity, the technology, and then, the setting and all the
Right.
things that happen in a setting. It's not just a classroom. That classroom might be fine, but when the kid goes to gym, well, that's, still a school setting, but a lot different
Different.
than when they're in, the recess outside.
Right. Exactly.
So we
It's
really have to look at all those things.
there's no, I always say there's no one size fits all. And then, people will call me and say, "Oh, I need a switch. What's a good switch to pick?" And I'm like, you can give generalization, but I said, this is not a cookie cutter type of application. It's like we have generalization, but then we always go back to is what can they do, not what they can't do. What can they
Exactly.
do? And then you try and build options around that and say, okay, if they can do this, then, these would be good type switches. And then there's so many facets. Do they have visual impairment? Are they tactilely defensive? There's so many facets that you have to take into consideration to give them the best options.
Right. And for motor efficiency, besides just vision, hearing, and tactile, we have to think about proprioception, which is where your body is in space, so that they don't always have to have like this direct visual contact in order to have success in accessing that switch. A sense of, okay, here's my switch. I know where my switch is. I know where my body is. I could hit it.
Right.
So that somatosensory system also is in play for motor efficiency for switch
So
access.
it can become like second nature, something you don't really have to put a lot of thought into
Mhm.
every time.
Right. And so when we're thinking about access sites, we tend to look at the fingers and the hands first, um, because we have the most finest dexterity. We use the head next because our cervical spine is pretty good at precision, although repetitiveness at the cervical spine is not necessarily, something we need to look at and consider when we're looking at switch access for the hands. And then we're looking at sites like, even the arm, the elbow, the knee, the foot. But once we start getting into those areas, we have to remember that vision is not as astute as it is when you're using your hands, right?
Right.
So it's not that we won't use it. Of course, we will. We're going to use whatever is the most efficient. But we have to remember that now we might be relying on other systems
Right.
because vision isn't as direct.
And just to touch on something else too, like if somebody fatigue, depending on their diagnosis, if they're an ALS patient, maybe they can use their hands, but they fatigue pretty easy. Do we have to use a bigger, body part to access, things like that come into
Or
play, I'm
do
sure.
we give them more than one option? So in the morning, they might have the motor efficiency for that access part. We don't have to
Right.
take it away.
Right.
But as they fatigue, what can they use then?
Right.
So instead of taking away, let's add. Let's see
Right.
what they could use when they're getting tired. And how do we make that more efficient for them? And yes, find a point of access that doesn't require as much energy.
Right. You're just shifting gears. It's like you said, in the morning they're good here, but then maybe, like you said, once the day goes on, where else can we give them something that's a reliable,
Mhm.
area to work with?
Right. And that all starts from adaptive play, right? Like that all starts, we don't just start off being able to ski down a diamond. There's a lot of things that happen until we get to that level of motor efficiency. If we think of access to AT on that same scale, we really, it puts it into a different perspective. Like you really, honor what it takes to gain skill acquisition and motor efficiency so that you could have fluid interaction with your environment.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think with kids, it's just so important to give them that agency. Learned helplessness is very quick and it's not intentional very often. It's really not. Um, Adults and therapists, the hardest thing for a therapist to do is to sit on their hands. Like we're just like we want to just get in there,
Right.
like we like please let me touch you, help you facilitate, like it's just we just to sit on our hands and just, allow the child the opportunity to get their own self feedback and figuring out and problem solving how they can do this.
Right.
You know, we're very quick to do that for them, and response time differs so much with these children, and we really have to like allow for individual response time,
Right.
even though it's an uncomfortable response time for us. And really giving them that space to develop it.
Yeah. No, it's important. Like you said, yeah, there's so many so many facets to, being an occupational therapist and just letting people do their day-to-day lives.
Yeah.
That we always stay, like I always say, because I work in this field, there's a lot of things we take for granted that we just do. And it's like, if you had that taken away from you or had to modify it, it would be, it's a hard thing to basically readapt and trying to just keep doing what you have to do.
Yes. And I as I'm teaching AT now, I'm challenging, I think about 40 years ago, I was 12, obviously. Um, when I was working with Dr. Kaner and we were looking at all the AT then, I mean, we had floppy disks, right? Like it was just
Right.
like what was available to us. Like what he was providing was magic, right? Like it was just magic. And now I just had my students do an assignment. In every assignment, I include what do you see the future of AT looking like in your 40-year career?
Right.
You're treating a child with this, you're providing that. What do you think, what do you project? What do you see them using when they're 13, when they're 25, when they're 30? What will be available? I mean, we're seeing AI just,
It's
boom.
amazing. I,
Um, and I just want to challenge them to think in the future so that they could participate, not just like, you know, I think OTs and all of us, all of us that are in rehab have a real valuable space in the conversation of the future of AT and um, how it's going to really help our clients. The whole purpose is to increase participation and increase engagement so that that person can have as much independence or level of activity in their desired tasks, in their desired
right.
occupations.
With all the advancements in tech, all all the therapists, their skill sets will evolve. Like where like you said, when we work in early days with Dr. Kaner, like we only had so many things available to us. Now it's like your mindset has to change. You always have to think outside the box because now it's like, okay, well, 10 years ago we didn't have that, but now we have XYZ. So we can close the gap and make things more accessible, make people have more independence just because the technology is evolving so fast. And there's so much good stuff out there today that we didn't even have 5 years ago. So
Absolutely.
it's definitely it's an exciting time if you're just coming into this field. You're on the basically the new frontier, I say. That's what we're right on the cusp of some major changes coming down the pike. And it's exciting, and especially for you as a teacher and educator to see you saw what was the past and where we're going. And it is exciting for young people to get involved in this space,
It's
that there's going to be
amazing.
so many things you'll be able to help people so much more.
I mean, I remember when Alexa first came out, or Siri, whichever one it
Hmm.
was, and I had a patient that was not very verbal, but understood a lot and couldn't access it, was having trouble accessing it. So, we just created the AAC device that was able to say, turn on the TV or whatever it
Right.
was. It was very basic and crude at that point, but we were able to do that, and I think about how like how excited we were, and
Right.
it's just getting better and better and better.
And now I had some people on a few podcasts ago. They are working with some of the big companies like Google and Amazon to basically incorporate people that don't speak perfectly, that don't articulate
Right.
like you and I, so that they can utilize this tech, even though this tech is made for the mainstream. Why can't people who have special needs use it as well? Because it's a powerful tool,
Right.
just like our phones, our
Yep.
tablets,
Yep.
you know.
And there is like Dragon software was available when I was, doing this years ago,
Right.
but it has developed so much that it
Oh,
understands dysarthria.
yeah. And it
You know,
learns. Now this stuff with all the AI, this stuff learns. It'll learn the way you speak. It'll understand your words. And it's not like you have to like the old days, you had to program in stuff manually. Now it'll be like, because it's AI, it'll just learn on its own.
it'll like translate, like
And it'll just get
it'll
better
just
and better.
right,
It
right.
just can
It's
self-evolving.
it's amazing. So I think I do. I think about that, and I think about like it's so exciting and it's so incredible. And my caveat is always like just to make sure that the human is still the one with the intent,
Right. Exactly.
right? Regardless of the level of motor efficiency or whatever the skill is, the human is still the one directing it. Whereas, I worry about AI being so efficient that then it becomes learned helplessness on a
I was gonna
robot,
say it's an
right?
AI learned helplessness. Now the AI is like the parent or the therapist. Let me jump in there and
Exactly.
help you. they still need to be able to do it for themselves. You're just
Yes.
helping them do it. So,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
So it's that fine line, right?
right,
You know, especially with robotics coming out right now. It's
right.
really incredible.
I had a
Um,
guy on that was using an ectoskeleton, so he was able to walk and everything. I mean, he
it's
still was
amazing.
driving it, but he was able to do it with the assistance of the
Yeah.
ectoskeleton.
And those have come a long way.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
it's
it's truly,
incredible.
truly remarkable. And I think about that. And then, okay, so now if you have an exoskeleton that's really going to be that efficient in movement, how will that impact driving,
Right. We
right?
already have self-driving cars. I
Right.
mean,
Like, what's going to open up? And then what skills do the users need to be able to intentionally direct that complexity?
right,
So we really, so, coming back full circle to play, we really need to start thinking about giving these kids early on these types of skills that might be their partners in
right.
accessing.
Laying down the
Right.
foundational skill sets that they'll need to
Mm-hmm.
navigate the world
Mm-hmm.
the way they have to.
Mm-hmm.
We're
Yeah.
almost out of time, Tina. Is there anything that you want to share before we wrap up the podcast today? I mean, it's been a great podcast. We did cover a lot of stuff and a lot of great information.
I think the only thing that I still feel that is not available as much as I would like to be. It's not that it's not available, but I would love to have greater access is early mobility, really early mobility, like the Barbie cars that are now that could be adapted. I'm working in the Bronx, so I really see, the whole urban communities, and I'm so interested and curious of, what are the barriers on the subways and what are the barriers, these curbs. And we know them. We know them. I mean, I grew up in the city.
Right.
I could list them, but I think it'd be very interesting to really get in there and look at, how can we really help young families, young children have as much community access and community mobility at a very young age in a challenging urban setting like New York.
All right. Very great. Good, great insight. Tina, I'm going to end it on that because we're just about out of time.
Okay.
So, guys, I've been your host, Vinny Lavodi, for Assistive Tech Today podcast, and our special guest, Dr. Tina Weisman of Occupational Therapy. As we say, another one in the books, and we'll see you guys all on the next podcast. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Vinny.
Thank you, Tina.